Kia ora koutou katoa, and welcome to the first in a series of short tutorial videos on the National Asset Performance Assessment Framework. These videos are aimed at people who are unfamiliar with the framework and provide a succinct overview on the various components that make up the asset performance tool. I'll provide some suggestions on best practice from my experience of using the framework, noting that parts of the assessment are subjective and open to interpretation. I welcome any challenges or counter thoughts. In-depth discussion on the performance assessment methodologies is beyond the scope of these videos. And I've put these videos together over quite a short time frame, so forgive me for my English accent and any incoherent slurs or mispronunciations. And there is also a cat wandering around meowing for its breakfast. I apologise. So I thought I would start by having a general discussion around the asset performance assessment framework before taking a closer look at the asset performance tool spreadsheet. Now, when I say framework, I am simply referring to its two component parts. Firstly, the code of practice, which you should be able to see on the right-hand side over here. The code of practice is a 50-page good practice guideline document which discusses the theory and methodology behind the asset performance assessments. The other component, the asset performance tool, which I'll herein refer to as the tool, which is on the left of your screen, is essentially an Excel spreadsheet. It's the system used to store and analyze the data required for each assessment and which produces the overall performance scores in terms of risk. So for anyone new to the asset performance framework, I would suggest reading the 50-page code of practice document end to end, and then repeat, because when I was reading it, probably even after the third, fourth, maybe fifth times of reading it, I was still picking up new bits that I'd missed, new understanding, particularly when I used it in parallel with actually using the tool. It's kind of like a puzzle. There are lots of pieces to it. And what complicates things slightly is that the code of practice is not, it hasn't been updated to reflect the latest version of the tool spreadsheet. But having said that, they are only minor differences. Anyway, have a good read through the code of practice and become familiar with the document. Okay, so now let's take a look at the tool itself. That is the third sheet. So if I jump to the first, so there's around 10 sheets or tabs in this spreadsheet, which we will have a closer look at over this tutorial. So I'll try to provide some context and linkages from the tool back to the code of practice, but anything that doesn't make sense initially should do in the later tutorials. But you know, feel free to reach out and email me if you have any burning questions. Okay, so this is the first sheet of the tool, and it's simply a reference sheet. It's the framework, which has essentially been reproduced from the code of practice. If you were to jump to section 5, page 12, you would see that framework pop up. There we go. Simply a reference for you to have a look at, and kind of indicates what the best order in doing the assessment is. And similar to the first sheet, the cross-section sheet is another simple, essentially it's just an image that's been reproduced from the code, which shows a typical cross-section of a river and the various assets and components that you're likely to see. Okay, move on to scheme definition. This is one of the most important sheets, besides the actual assessment sheet itself, which we will look at next. So the information to be populated on this sheet provides context to the assessment. Some data influences the assessment itself, and some data provides baseline for resulting information on the summary tab. So let's take a closer look. So the first few cells are simply for context and don't influence the assessment in any way. Simply adding the name of the scheme and the date. If we jump forward to the assessment sheet, anything you type in those cells will come up here. So in fact, if I was to pull up another example where I've completed an assessment, we can see I've typed in Waipawa River and a date, and then that simply updated these bits here. Okay, the level of service here, as far as I am aware, does not affect the assessment and is purely for context too. It may pop up on the summary tab, but again, just in reference form. However, for the next few cells, not design freeboard, but from river classification and foundation classification, we do start to see some effects elsewhere in the tool. Okay, so by classifying the type of river that we're assessing, and by classifying the type of foundation, that changes. We'll start to see some changes down here. So basically, it will indicate the tool. Once you've had a read through that, you'll see here the tool indicates different types of frequencies for various inspections, such as crest level survey and berm surveys, for example. So let's take an example. The code of practice suggests for a confined channel that there should be a berm survey every 10 years. Yet for a meandering channel, it suggests every 5 years. And we can just paint that picture by popping that in. You see the target years is 10 years, whereas if we change that to meandering, if I've got my notes right, it should change to 5, which it does. Now, if we jump forward a few sheets, you'll see at the bottom here, we do have a river type and a foundation sheet. So if we jump to river type, it provides the different numbers for the frequencies, a little description there, and also you can, you can have a look at the code of practice to get a bit of a better understanding there. And again, it's similar for foundation. If you jump to that sheet, for different foundation types, the code suggests what frequency it should be between your inspections. Now, it is possible to change both of these frequencies to tailor to your council's frequency. For example, if you feel the crest level survey for peat is actually, it's actually 5 years, you can manually change that, and we can, hopefully we'll see that's changed. If we jump back to scheme definition and we throw peat in there, yeah, we can see that no longer says 6 and it says 5. Another way of changing the frequency without manually changing the table is simply to change things here, and that will essentially supersede the original figure later on in the assessment. My advice would be, if you are going to change the frequencies from the original numbers, just make sure to leave a comment somewhere in the spreadsheet, the notes section on the scheme definition page, which you can see is not a bad idea. Yeah, so let's jump back to where we left off. We were around here. So these 3 cells, so essentially, when was the last scheme review done? What is the change in level of service today from that last scheme review? And then just a short description of what's causing that change. So again, if I just showed you a quick example from when I did Gisborne, you can see that the last scheme review was in 2009. Today, we're actually looking at 125%, and that was by and large due to climate change allowances. But that just gives you a bit of an idea of what you might be popping in there. So just get rid of that. All right, so that's pretty much those. If we jump down here, okay, so let's finish the inspection history section. So having filled out the scheme description above, we would have set the frequencies, which we have seen here. Yeah. So in this bit, we need to add in our dates of the survey. So let's say we have a super recent one, 2021, but maybe the crest level survey, just for argument's sake, let's just say it's 10 years older. We will start to see, we're going to actually have to put a date in for the assessment. So let's just say very fresh. Now you would have noticed that this just changed to outside the target because I said it's done the beginning of this month, and the target for bed surveys was every 5 years. The target for crest level surveys was also 5 years, but that's 10 years old. That's 11 years, nearly 12 years old. So now it's saying that it's outside the target, and this does influence later on in the spreadsheet, but we're actually going to talk about that in more detail in a later tutorial. Let me just pop in some other random dates. Those, yep, we'll just go like that. That's enough for now, I think. So yep, you'll fill in the dates of your all the data basically that you're going to be using for this assessment. Put your dates in, and then we need to add in the confidence of that data. So there is a data confidence tab to help you populate these cells. You can navigate to the second last sheet, I think it is. Yep, data confidence score. And this basically provides you some descriptions. It's a 1 to 5 scoring system. So if you're super confident in the data you're using for your BERM survey, let's say, and it matches up with the description here, you might have a more thorough way of doing it. And then there's also some more bespoke descriptions for capacity. Don't worry so much about, the percent adjuster section here. We are going to cover that in a later tutorial. So you can use this, and also you can refer to section 10 of the code of practice, just for completeness. Data confidence there. You could read up on that section just to get a bit more information. So let's jump back to the scheme description. So then you would have added in your confidence. Yep, BERM's bed surveys highly reliable. It's highly reliable. This one perhaps not. Maybe it's a bit old, so we'll put pin 3, and we'll leave it at that for now. And what we will see when we have a quick look through the assessment tab next, you should see these numbers pop up. Note there's an average confidence for capacity there, and there's a poorest confidence. For intrinsic strength, there is only one figure, no average or poorest, because there's only one parameter being scored there. So just remember those numbers. It's the same for here, but I'm just not going to go through that right now. Okay. Okay, so just to quickly recap, we've covered the first 3 sheets of the tool: the framework, cross-section, and scheme definition. And we've also had a look at the river type and foundation sheets, and had a brief look at, let's say, half of the data confidence sheet. That still leaves a few sheets to visit. I think the next appropriate sheet to look at would be just to get a basic familiarity with the assessment sheet, which is where all the magic happens. Would say it's the largest and most important sheet of them all. It's where the data is stored and the performance score is analyzed and calculated. A sheet with 150 different columns. Yeah, that's right, 150 different columns of data. Fortunately, we don't have to enter data into all of them. Some of them are just calculation cells. So the next few tutorials will run through this sheet and its component parts in a lot more detail, and we'll use some example data, but for now, just a quick general overview. So I break this sheet down into 6 parts. You've got the river classification section from the reach ID in column A to the target protection level in column I. And then you have the consequence section starting in the next column. That goes all the way to target data confidence met. So that's the first 2 sections. And then we move on to the probability of failure, which has 3 component parts, starting with capacity. 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 different return period levels, which you can assess. And then the 4th area is intrinsic strength, which is broken down into 3 parameters there: foundation, softening, and stability and seepage. And then the last component of the probability of failure is condition, which is the largest section, which goes from in-river conveyance all the way to essentially here, modified condition. And then lastly, the 6th section is the risk score, which is where all the data from the previous 4 sections are used to calculate performance score, which is turned into a risk score. Okay, so that was the whistle-stop tour of the assessment sheet. We will take a closer look next time. So we'll wrap things up there. We've had a look through the framework sheet, the cross-section sheet, scheme definition, assessment, river type, foundation, and data confidence. The consequence, probability, and risk score sheets, as well as the summary tab, are best looked at when we delve into the assessment sheet in more detail with example data. All right. Ka kite anō, kia koutou katoa.